Today we're going to look at the vertebral column, so your vertebrae, your backbone, and we'll look at the separate vertebrae that make that up. So the vertebral column itself is composed of many separate vertebrae. So each one of these is a separate vertebrae that make up your backbone. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about like their C1 vertebrae, their T1 vertebrae, their lumbar vertebrae. So each one of them are separate, and each one of them should be separated by large, fairly large sections of cartilage. And that's what prevents them from rubbing together. So separated by fibrocartilaginous intervertebral discs is what those are called. Connected by ligaments, they extend from the skull to the pelvis. So the ligaments, when people have sore back, sometimes it's the ligament, sometimes it's actually the vertebrae. The vertebrae supports the head and trunk. It protects the spinal cord that's going to run through the center of it. And that area that the spinal cord passes through is called the vertebral canal. And this is, like I said, probably from a cow. But you can see that canal right there where the spinal cord will run through. And you can also see here that this cartilage is pretty much gone. And as a person ages, those thick intervertebral discs will become more thin, and that's what causes a lot of back pain in older people. So when we actually look at a vertebrae, there's going to be parts to each one. We'll look at the body, the pedicles, laminae, spiny process, vertebral foramen, transverse process, the articular processes, and the intervertebral foramen. So first thing that you should know is you have cervical vertebrae that make up your cervical curvature. And notice how your back curves. That's a normal curve. If your spine or vertebral column was straight, you wouldn't be able to balance. The support wouldn't be as good. So that curving actually makes your body function better. You can actually have like scoliosis where your spine would be curved to the side. That's not, and there's varying degrees of scoliosis. A lot of people actually have mild cases of that. But back to cervical vertebrae or your neck vertebrae. Thoracic vertebrae are going to connect to your ribs. So thoracic are going to connect to your ribs. Lumbar is your lower back. And then you have your sacrum at the bottom. And coccyx is basically your little tailbone. So the curvatures go with pretty much the vertebrae that are there. Cervical vertebrae, there are 7. The numbers you should know, I know that's on one of your labeling. There are 7 bones that make the neck and support the head.
You doing any plant and animal cell stuff?
A little bit.
Portfolio, rubric type thing?
Not
I don't know,
portfolio.
the printer wasn't working when I put some paper in this come out, so I didn't know
Okay.
if something here or not.
All right.
Alright.
Thank you. So, 7 vertebrae, distinct transverse foramen that are going to come out to the side. The first vertebrae and the second vertebrae have their very own names. So the very first vertebrae at the top of the neck is the atlas. The second one is the axis. So atlas supports the head. It's where your head attaches. It has 2 little facets, 2 little, what do I want to say? 2 little spots where your head is going to sit right on those facets. And that's where it articulates with these occipital condyles. And because of its function, it doesn't have a body and it doesn't have a spiny process. It's only going to have a transverse process. Second vertebrae, the axis, shaped a little bit different again. It has kind of like a tooth-like dents that pivots within the atlas. Both of these kind of help your head to have movement to, lift up and turn sideways. Features that separate your cervical vertebrae from the rest are the bifid spinous processes and the transverse foramen. Your spinous processes are going to be a little bit different, and we will look at pictures of these. So here we go. Here, if I'm looking at my cervical vertebrae, laminae are like these little ridges or connecting bridges. The spinous process on your cervical vertebrae are very, very short. That's why they're called bifid. The transverse process is what's going to come off to the side. There will be a transverse foramen. Foramen is an opening. So there's a transverse foramen on each side. And then the vertebral foramen is where the spinal cord is going to go through. And here, most of your cervical vertebrae are going to have a small body portion. The two at the top don't even really have that body part to it. Let's see. So here, if I'm looking at this, this would be your atlas. This would be the first one. And here is the part where it's going to hold the head on top. Notice that it doesn't have a body part to it. Here, the axis has kind of a small dens, is what it's called. It's not really a body part. Transverse foramen or transverse process is both going to go to the side always. There's the foramen, vertebral foramen. Spiny process is what's going to stick out or come up to the top. And that is what you feel on your, like if you rub somebody's back. All of these that stick out and you feel along your back, that's the spinous process. And if you look up here, the atlas does not have one, and this would be your axis. And then so C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. And this will be T1, and that'll be the first that attaches to your ribs. Thoracic vertebrae, there's 12 thoracic vertebrae. You have 12 ribs that will attach to them. So they articulate to the ribs. They're bigger, they're stronger than your neck or your cervical vertebrae. And the further down you go, the larger the vertebrae are going to get. Features that thoracic vertebrae have, they are going to have a long, fairly thin spinous process. The facets on the side of the body, they are the only vertebrae that have facets that connect with ribs. So the 12 thoracic vertebrae are the ones that are going to attach to your ribs. So if I look at this, here's the body of this particular vertebrae. Spinous process, very thin and pointed. Transverse process, still going to go out to the side. And each transverse process will have this facet that's going to articulate with a rib. So you can see here where they articulate. And if you look at the front, the ribs curve around and actually articulate kind of towards the front also. Vertebral foramen, spinal cord, and here, like I said, there's two parts because where the rib curves around, it's going to attach at the front, and then it's also going to attach at the back. Lumbar, lower back. There are 5. They are large. They're the largest vertebrae that you have that are not fused together. They are very important in supporting the weight of your body. Back aches, people who are older, people who are heavier, people who are pregnant. The lower lumbar is a lot of times the area that will bother them because that supports most of your weight. Here you can see the body is bigger, which makes the vertebral foramen look smaller because the body portion is so big. Here there's a small little branch called a pedicle. It's thick. It's a thick bridge. Fairly pointed spiny process yet. Transverse process. And then your articular process that's going to attach basically where they kind of come together, where it comes around. Anything else? So 7, 12, 5. Sacrum. The sacrum is kind of the top part of your tailbone. So it is this larger chunk, and then your actual tailbone is the coccyx that sits down at the bottom. So the sacrum, kind of triangular shaped. It's at the base, and it's made up of 5 vertebrae that have fused into one bone. Features include, there's a ridge, sacral foramen, sacral canal. We'll look at those. The coccyx, the tailbone, is the lowest part, and if you look at it, it looks like there are like 4 little rings. There are 4 fused vertebrae that make up your tailbone. So 5 make up the sacrum, 4 make up the coccyx. And if I look at this, so here's the sacrum. Promontory is where it's kind of a ridge, where it sticks out. Sacral canal goes down the middle, down the center, and that's basically where your spinal cord is going to come into the sacrum, and then your nerves are going to come out also. So the sacral canal is where your spinal cord will go. Posterior sacral foramen, posterior's on the back, anterior's on the front, so all the foramen, all the openings. And then there's a little spot called the sacral hiatus, and that's basically just a little part. It's basically where your tailbone is going to attach to your sacrum. And that's all of your vertebrae. Actually, that one is a little bit shorter than some of the other sections.